if you're new to Odyssey, you may not have heard, but you should hear that when you're walking in Odyssey as part of the Odyssey journey, you're not walking, you never walk alone. And I think this was attributed to Peter Reinbeck, but this really understates we're an open science, open source, welcoming community. We really partner with individuals as they go through the Odyssey journey, learning about the data model, learning how to use the tools, learning how to perform a network study. And really, we have a lot of resources for folks who are going through the Odyssey journey. We have over 300 publications, over 600 videos on YouTube. We've got 18 courses in Eden. We have 28 working groups to get involved with. We have our forum for asking questions. And so we always have described this journey as an individual's journey and how they can learn about the data model and how they can become efficient within Odyssey. And also we, of course, have the great now career speaker event starting next Monday. So today we wanted to turn it around and say, how do you get others in your organization interested in Odyssey? I am a physicist by training, so I like to create a critical mass. I know that science is a team sport, and I want to get others in my organization also involved in Odyssey so we can really get more involved with it. And as we know, it's also not linear. The more people you can get involved, the more you can get into delivering output in terms of research. And so often, and as I've shown, there's way too much out there for one person to know about Odyssey already. We've got way too many articles, way too much material, and there's different communities that we actually form within the Odyssey, within Odyssey as well. And so the questions are, how do you help align your organization? How do you find others in your organization? How do you get the full value out of Odyssey to be able to within your organization? So we know that there's lots of what ways can you also address the potential barriers of culture, history, structures, incentives, resource allocation, inertia of organizations. And so I find that and we know that Odyssey represents more than one type of organization. I sit inside a healthcare system here at Johns Hopkins, but we know that Odyssey is really relevant to many healthcare coverage organizations, to government agencies and pharmaceutical and device manufacturers looking at real-world evidence, clinical research organizations and policy organizations, and even data and technology engineering companies. And I'm sure I may have missed one or two types of organizations that are all part of our ecosystem. And so every organization is very different. Every organization type is different. And so really trying to find how to fit Odyssey within your organization is really the topic of today's call. And how do we try to find ways of finding better alignment to your organizational goals? And so I'm going to start by talking about healthcare, but we also have Ajit Londhe and Keran Moll from pharmaceutical companies, Regeneron and AMGEN. And we also have Klebanov from the Odysseus data services. And so this will be trying to have a coverage of different types of organizations. And so I'm going to start with healthcare because that's what I know the best. I've been inside healthcare for the past 30 plus years. And we have a great Odyssey healthcare systems interest group. And we actually put together an abstract this year on why it's beneficial for health systems to adopt the OMOP data model. And those reasons are it helps increase the productivity of our staff. Instead of having to go mining into all of our EMR each time and building new data models, it really can improve the productivity when using a central data model for analysis and collaborative internal research studies. It actually can be used for increasing use of recruitment and retention of staff to show off the data quality and help researchers within your organization. It actually provides a level of control over costs and risk with all the understanding of all the software that comes along with Odyssey being open source and the platform control that you have over Odyssey. And probably one of the most important reasons why health systems like Odyssey is it increases the control over data privacy since standardization happens within the healthcare system and the need to share patient level data is reduced. And so there's a lot of reasons why health systems like to adopt OMOP. But for me, the principal user within health systems is the clinician researcher. And so the clinician researcher is really my main focus point of how do I get them to be using Odyssey and OMOP to conduct their research. And so, so I have to look through the eyes of our clinician researchers, and they are seeing patients usually on a daily basis for most of the day. They usually do research in the after hours or part-time. They are frequently ordering tests and trying to make diagnosis, observing results and to medications, procedures, trying to understand the response to treatments, and they are looking for patterns and looking at how to care for their patients, and they're often forming questions. And so as a clinical researcher, they know that all the patients with the same diagnosis are not the same, and their job is to find a subgroup that defines a distinct approach to management, whether it's a different diagnosis or different response to medication. And so their goal is to look at as they are meeting with patients, is to form hypotheses and have hunches and be able to then ask questions that they can then take and try to formulate those questions to be able to ask. And so what's the challenges are, clinical researchers are really struggling today. Clinicians have a very hard time conducting research. Most clinicians and most health systems have all but abandoned it because because of the barriers to working with EMR data. I'm going to say that the data is not curated and requires a lot of data cleaning and preparation within an EMR. And I would say 90% of clinician researchers are not super excited about learning about SQL, R, and Python, nor do they have the time to do it. I teach SQL and Python and R and data science at Johns Hopkins, and I love the physicians who are willing to learn it, but I recognize that most physicians really just have clinical questions they need to answer, and they don't need to, and they don't want to invest the time or don't have the time to learn the technology behind it. They need applications that they can ask clinical questions in a statistically valid way, and then scale those across health systems so they can have a hunch, but then that question needs to be validated across a larger federation of data so that they can really validate it statistically and then be able to bring that evidence back in. And so for me, this is one of the things I am super excited about within Odyssey. I've been working in clinical research for decades, and I do feel like data science as a service and the Atlas tool is a really powerful tool for clinicians. They can begin to ask questions and create powerful cohort definitions for their target populations, their comparator populations, and be able to do this without having to be trained in the data science behind it. And so it still is a team sport, but this really is a powerful new way of performing data science. When I often work with clinicians and I give them millions of rows of data, they often are not trained in how to work with that data, and it makes it difficult for them to work with it effectively. So the challenges are, I feel like Odyssey, and we're going through a big data moment in healthcare, where we now have, where most clinician researchers are trained in small data sets. They're used to doing chart abstraction off of Epic and their EMR, and so they're using Excel and REDCap, but they're looking at small data sets of maybe a few hundred patients with maybe 10 to 20 variables around those patients. And now I'm seeing with EMRs, I can literally get you millions of records and get you all the labs and procedures. And so this becomes a big change in how we conduct the research. And with Odyssey, we now can do computational epidemiology that allows us to have a new way of doing things reproducibly. This is the definition of a scientific revolution. And the challenge is most clinicians are certainly excited by this, but they are not trained to, they've already invested heavily in learning SAS and Stata or other techniques on how to conduct research, and it's very hard for them to retool. And we should understand this, that generally under normal conditions, most researchers are not necessarily innovators, but puzzle solvers. And we shouldn't expect them just to jump onto a new way of doing things just because it's available. And so we've often seen this with many scientific revolutions, that they typically take 3 to 4 decades to penetrate the mainstream of how things are operating. And today, if you look at observational research done in healthcare, we're still seeing a very small fraction of that being done within the Odyssey framework. And so we still have the work cut out for us to help accelerate that adoption. And so I don't know about you, but I'm hoping to, we often know that if I take my clinical data and I convert it to OMOP, that doesn't mean that the researchers will automatically flock to my OMOP data source and begin using it. So we know that if we build it, they probably won't come. It takes a little bit more than just providing the data and the technology to use the data within a health system. So I need to figure out a better way of how to approach this. And so at Johns Hopkins, one of the things that we've done is we've looked at what we call an influence model and trying to understand the clinician researcher, their motivations, and understanding their sources of motivation and how can we help them really better align and take advantage of this new technology. And what I really want to do is I don't want this to take several decades. I want to do this. I'm not that patient. And so I want to have a much more rapid adoption of this new way of doing things inside our health system. And so traditionally, the sources of influence are there's ability. Can you do it at the organizational level? Have you converted your EMR data to OMOP? If you haven't, then it's very hard. It's a necessary but insufficient step. And then there's also motivation. So there's basically at the organizational level, there's the ability, and then there's the motivation. So an organization might say this is super important. They might align your raises to it or your learning and growth goals. Here in healthcare, we're very decentralized, and so we don't really have that many organizational motivators. And so we are usually having to rely on what we call lateral influence techniques. But if you work in the corporate world, it might be that your organization is saying we're making a heavy investment into Odyssey, and this is how we're going to be conducting our real world analysis. And a good example would be the Darwin initiative in the European Medical Agency and how that's really driving a lot of regulatory sciences to adopt the Odyssey framework. But we also know that at the organizational level, it doesn't always mean what goes on locally within your team. And so does your team have the skills and ability to work within Odyssey? We know that there's different skills involved. There's analytical skills, informatics, statisticals, as well as understanding the clinical domain. And then, of course, there's also motivation. Is your team incentivized to work as a group? And then lastly, there's the individual ability. Do you feel like you're capable of working with an Odyssey? Do you understand the data model? Do you understand the methods around it? There's a lot of different packages within Hades that can do all kinds of great statistical techniques, but how comfortable are you with them? And then are you really incentivized? Do you feel like this is going to be helpful for your career promotion? Do you feel like this is something that's going to help you with what you want to accomplish and asking the clinical questions that you have? And I guess the whole tenet for my presentation today is that I think today most healthcare systems focus on the upper left-hand corner. We put all of our energy into converting our EMR data to OMOP, and then we stand up an Atlas instance in DQD, and we go, whew, that was a lot of work, we're done. And we try to keep that instance up to date, but we don't understand the other sources of motivation. And so often people don't flock to our OMOP data set, and we don't get a ton of value out of it within our health system. And I really want to get a lot of value out of it within my health system. So we looked for ways, and they're really not very expensive, for once you've done the work of providing OMOP and within your organization, how you can then try to align it to people's incentives to be able to better take advantage of it within your organization. And so that's really what I'll just quickly go through what we've done so far. And we're still on that journey ourselves. So one of the things that we've done, of course, is we, like most health systems that have embraced Odyssey, we have taken our EMR data and we've done the hard work of mapping it into the OMOP data model. And we know that's we're never done. There's always a long tail of flow sheets and smart data elements. There's always new data extensions like oncology that we want to embrace. But then with that, we've also provided secure environments to be able to access those data projections. And in that secure network, we've stood up Atlas instances and the DQD so that we can then have people be able to have the tools that they need all within the secure environment. And then we have a group within the Johns Hopkins, we have a data trust. The data trust has authorized a group, the Clinical Center for Data Analysis, to help researchers access data for research purposes. And we have people in the CCDA who are trained in OMOP that can help answer people's questions. Because often when someone has a research question, when they go to the CCDA, they need a lot of consultation help to figure out what data they're actually talking about and really understand what question they're trying to ask and how they want to aggregate the data. And really, OMOP is a great way to help them through that process. And so I think this is the necessary components to what you have to have to really take advantage of OMOP. But the real goals are trying to get beyond this to other capabilities to take full advantage of it. And so the next two that we've been working on is one is we actually a lot of people, we've got thousands of clinical researchers and clinicians at Johns Hopkins, and I would say that only maybe 10% are even aware that we have an OMOP instance. And so just creating awareness within highly decentralized healthcare organizations can be a lot of work. And so you need to actually have to create a little presence. And so we've created a website, and then also trying to provide people and understanding what data is even available. And so I'll share those two steps that we've done. So the first is, you can see the URL on the top of the screen. You can actually go to that and see what we've done. We put together a landing page for people within Johns Hopkins on understanding how to take advantage of OMOP. And in there, we have some testimonials. We try to explain what it is. We have links out to the Book of Odyssey, to the Eden Academy. We also put together some really short FAQs. The first question everyone asks is, how much is this going to cost me? And so we wanted to make sure that we can quickly get to people's questions around how to access the data, how much is it going to cost them, what sort of thing, how they can access this resource through the traditional IRB methods. But even just having a simple web page like this is actually really important, so people can know what is even available. And we found that this has helped raise some awareness. And then on top of that, we're almost gone through our full legal process, is that we're creating a de-identified data set of all of our patients within Hopkins, all 2.6 million patients. And what we're doing is we're going through the shift and truncate de-identification method, which was actually tied to this paper from the Columbia on how to preserve temporal relationships. We're also removing rare concepts and patients over 90, and shrinking the zip codes down to 3 digits, and removing clinical sites and providers, and then providing an Atlas user interface. So the goal is, without an IRB, people can see how many concept counts do I have for certain concepts within OMOP. And so this is usually the first place people want to start, is they want to see how much data is available that they're interested in. And so this is something that we've been working with legal on for the past 6 months, and we're at the final stages of hopefully releasing that in September to all of our community without an IRB within Johns Hopkins, that they can see how much data is available around their patient population of interest. And so I think these are kind of the first 2 steps that are needed to help get people interested in OMOP and seeing what's available for them. And of course, having an Atlas instance that people can use to be able to help build out their concept sets and understand how to really begin doing phenotyping. All right, so at the organizational level, as I mentioned, we really can't give people raises if they use Odyssey. We're not industry, we're not corporate, but what we can do is we have at least demonstrated leadership support for Odyssey. We've presented several internal messages about how Odyssey, we feel, is really the future of clinical research in medicine. We've also are providing letters of support for all of our researchers who are going after grants and trying to help them with their grant applications. And we've worked very closely with the IRB to make the process easier and faster for review. This has really been very useful, because Odyssey is great because there's no free text. Everything's tied to clinical concepts. By its nature, it's a limited data set, which is great. So that we've removed all easy identifiers. And it's really relatively straightforward to make it into a fully de-identified data set. So the IRB is very comfortable now with the method of, hey, we'll build this cohort in Atlas, we'll project them their OMOP data, they'll then analyze it in Atlas or in R, and then they'll be able to then aggregate the results. We even have a process where, if you're doing a network study and you don't even need row-level access, you actually have the full protocol for how you're going to analyze the data, which can be done by CCDA. We have a IRB template where we were able to get approval within a week within our IRB. And our IRB is pretty thorough in their review, but helping build that patterns and relationship with them to understand how this really changes the equation and helps protect patient privacy is really beneficial. So that's one major incentive for people, is getting easier access and to get through the IRB process a little bit faster. Let's talk about the team ability. And I think this is an important one, because I think, one of the things we stress here in Odyssey is it's really a multidisciplinary community of analytics, informatics, statistical methods, and clinical domain expertise. And this is really not sitting in any one place in an organization, certainly not in ours. And these folks don't usually interact with each other. So this was really a good experiment for us to try to bring these groups together. So we formed an NS Teams channel, just like we have within Odyssey. We have one within Hopkins, where we get together for half an hour every week, sorry. And we basically, I've attracted an interdisciplinary group of researchers working with Odyssey, and they are working from the informatics side, our data management team within our hospital who've done the OMOP transformation, so we can explain what we've done, and we can talk about the long tail. And we have faculty from our School of Public Health that are interested in doing research methods, as well as and really bringing in clinicians who are interested in going after grants using these, or going after network studies using this. And so my goal is actually to increase the cross-section of interaction, because we know as even as a statistician, you need to find clinicians who are interested in doing projects so that you can be able to find new grants and new opportunities. And so the goal here is to try to bring people together in that process. And so all we've done is we get together for a half an hour a week. We've been doing this now for about 1.5 years. And we've slowly grown to about 80 people, and I'd say about 20 people regularly show up. And a lot of it is about how do we create a clinical registry within Johns Hopkins? How do we help them with their grants? We've built several grant templates now within our Odyssey Teams environment, within our Hopkins Odyssey teams, where we have a grant language for different types of grants, and especially IRB templates. I think, yeah, so we have on our IRB templates, we have data acquisition and storage, data protections and management, patient safety and waivers of consent. And so really trying to focus on how do we make things go faster for our researchers? How do we make it easier for them and streamline the process for them to be able to ask a question within the Odyssey framework and be able to then try to scale it up to a network study or to help them get grant funding to be able to protect their time to be able to work on it further. And so we have frequently talked about updates in the infrastructure of what capabilities we can do within Johns Hopkins. We also, the other thing is there's no way one person can serve on the 28 working groups of in Odyssey. So this has been a great way for us to divide and conquer. And of course we invite guests in on occasion to help speed things up. On the team ability side, we actually have a subsetting process where we actually can automatically update an OMOP refresh for a clinical registry of basically physicians around a certain disease that they're looking for. They can see all their new patients in that OMOP framework, and they can ask questions in Atlas. And then we can also make static subsets for what we call retrospective secondary use studies as well. And so this is a typical process for breaking out. Once you have a patient ID list in Atlas, it's easy to do a subset. So I'll talk about team motivation for a minute, is that we have peer support we've done, and we actually bring in graduate students and take advantage of our academic mission as well to help the clinical researchers with some of the data science side of the thing. So mostly I wanted to get to the individual. So we know there's great methods for learning Odyssey at the individual level. There's the Eden Academy, which is a fantastic place to go. There's also the Book of Odyssey. One of the things that we also did is we created a graduate course here at Johns Hopkins, and we got an IRB to use Hopkins patients and convert it to the OMOP data model and use it for this class purposes. So if you can see exactly and really get to walk the walk and try and take a foot into the water to see how to work with Odyssey data. And we invited several clinician leaders from across Odyssey to really kind of just let people know that the water is fine and that they too can be doing this. Without having a computer science undergraduate degree, they can work within the Odyssey community. And so I feel this has been another way of welcoming people to use Odyssey within Johns Hopkins. And so from an individual motivation perspective, I think this is where we should be putting a lot of our energy to try to how do we convince clinical researchers to work with Odyssey. They are, a lot of it is getting access to data, streamline the data provisioning through OMOP subsetting. Access to, of course, getting access to multi-institutional data through network studies is certainly a major goal. Facilitating grants with a language library on data management, helping those grants be more competitive by using OMOP and reproducible methods. And I have 2 slides, and helping them get better citations with more competitive publications through computability and reproducibility of those methods. Building their international professional network, finding other physicians in their disease of interest through the Odyssey Working Group. We've already seen growth of different clinical domains in Odyssey. And of course, we invite a lot of Odyssey speakers to help percolate good ideas and best practices to raise awareness and interest, and have testimonials of successful local researchers using Odyssey to be able to get grants and help them in their promotion process. So I think hopefully this gives you a couple ideas that we're always open to more, but this has certainly been the journey that we've been walking on, and we're still going, just building a steam in that process. And so with that, I know we have 15 minutes left. I want to get to our great panel to talk about the different types of organizations that we have. And so our first panelist that I want to introduce is Keran Moll from Regeneron. And really with Keran, I wanted to ask how, in the clinical world, we talk about clinician researchers, but in pharmaceuticals, you're typically working with data analysts. How do you help them embrace the Odyssey way?
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for the opportunity. Yes, in my organization with them, I'm part of a team of 7 and soon to be 8 next week. So, and then our team and the team we work closely with, our skill set mainly encompass statistics, data science, and epidemiology. So definitely it's a different crowd than what you deal with to kind of persuade, get their buy-in. A few strategies we've been taking to kind of get people sort of comfortable with the OMOP data model and start using it more. That said, OMOP is one of the sort of tools in our arsenal of various analytical tools. It has, gained increasing sort of prominence, particularly after, the Darwin EU's adoption of this framework as their distributed data network. And also within the US, FDA, excuse me, FDA CBER's BEST initiative is also using OMOP as a sort of federated distributed network for surveillance purpose. From a life science perspective, we are interested in, how to standardize real world data, particularly in the field of regulatory decision-making field. So with that big picture to kind of motivate the team on the sort of more micro level, a few things we put in place. One is learning. We are all sort of researchers. We lifetime learners, and learning opportunities are always appreciated. We currently have weekly learning. With the help from Odysseus group. Greg, your group, and we have learning objectives on a weekly basis that help us to kind of build a very cohesive environment. And, we kind of brainstorm and then take sort of very relevant examples that regional team are interested in and use it to kind of learn the OMOP data model. Another thing is I'm part of the HEOR team. But within Regeneron, there are other teams in our genetics center. They are sort of ahead of us in their journey, in the Odyssey journey. And we are starting conversations to kind of collaborate across our organization to build more synergy and foster further collaboration. Another thing, my team, we're researchers, we kind of grow up using more SaaS-based tools. Another strategy is to kind of lower the threshold of the initial tool adoption. We start with learning together the Atlas tool, and we can also, currently use the SaaS to analyze OMOP data model. That all get us more comfortable and, kind of thinking the Odyssey way, so to speak. So that's, I'll give other members some time to speak, but thank you for the question.
Yeah, I really like how you're not forcing them to learn new technology on top of a new data model. Letting them, using SaaS to connect to OMOP is probably a nice step-wise without having them to throw them into R as well. So I think that's a great step. So our next panelist is Greg Klebanov from Odysseus Data Services. And Greg, so how does a data services company such as Odysseus leverage Odyssey to create strategic value for your customers?
Thank you, Paul. Hi, I'm Greg Klebanov. I'm the CTO at Odysseus Data Services. And prior to Odysseus, I was actually on a customer side, pharmaceutical sector. So who's actually our customers? The many pharmaceutical companies, the healthcare organizations, hospitals, the academic institutions, the payer organizations, the government institutions. So it's a quite wide, I guess, variety of customers with a great variety of use cases. So what do we do for them? We help them to essentially solve their problems, which is major problem with data standardization, right? So data standardization prevents today the execution of analysis, analytics, and data science at scale. So we help them to enable everything that actually Paul mentioned in his PowerPoints before, but enable their data sets in OMOP. We help them to install and configure Atlas and HEOR tools. We help them to actually conduct data analytics and develop methods and conduct actual studies. Right? So that's what we do. That's how we help essentially our customers in that space. Now, another, I think, really big selling point for Odyssey for them is also Odyssey is a mature community with many established standards and methods and tools. And so there's, besides Odysseus, there's quite a variety of diverse market of service providers in that space that they can choose from, which is probably a very important point for any commercial organization. The last but not the least, I think it's the element of innovation. I think Odyssey is a prime example where it's a never-ending, ongoing innovation where OMOP and tools and new methods are being constantly evolving, new methods being developed, really pushing the limits of what's possible today on a science perspective. But one very important point I would like to mention is that many of our customers are also active collaborators in Odyssey, and many of our customers, they are a part of Odyssey. So many of them, even those that not maybe directly actively contribute to the development of standards in Odyssey or tools in Odyssey, they also contribute in terms of funding certain projects. And for example, Atlas feature development or vaccine vocabularies were probably one of the last great examples where the funds came from pharmaceutical sector in this specific case.
Well, I know that a lot of the many contributions to the Odyssey open software community come from Odysseus software developers. It's just tremendous that they're making such contributions. And so, thank you. So, and Ajit from AMGEN, I guess question for you is, how do you engage non-technical epidemiologists into the Odyssey tools such as Atlas?
Yeah, so you know, our journey is trying to engineer a bit of a sea change at AMGEN. You know, I came from Patrick's organization at Janssen, where everybody there is certainly Odyssey through and through. Doesn't matter about technical skills, but uses Atlas every day and is hands-on with the data every day. At AMGEN, that's not the case. There's certainly more of a historical kind of division of skill sets between epidemiologists and programmers and technologists. And so I've been trying to kind of shift us towards a model of getting our epidemiologists more hands-on with the data and to have, you know, much fewer iterations between study ideation and, you know, programming. Let's actually get some of these answers and insights up front. So Atlas really is the gateway for that. It does kind of provide, you know, with, you know, pretty good effect, the ability for even non-technical users, which we have a lot of, to actually be able to design study assets, generate cohorts, generate characterizations, and so forth. And so that's become a huge part of our way of trying to build organizational trust in Odyssey and kind of embracing Odyssey methods. And we've seen that kind of actually work pretty well. You know, we've actually had epidemiologists that never got their hands on data become, you know, have their inner data scientist has been unlocked, so to speak. And I think to kind of facilitate that, you know, we need to make sure that the usage of Atlas, people are comfortable with it. There was a question in the chat from Katie Sadowski about, you know, is there any sort of review process that anyone's implemented? We had to, because even though Atlas is nice and easy to use, it might be too easy to use. And there might be folks that feel like if I click on this button or click on that button, how do I know I'm not putting together something that's just completely wrong? So we've had to go through and implement workflows such as QC and review, depending on the criticality. Maybe it's independent QC. Somebody else creates the same asset and then you compare after the fact. We've gone through different steps to make sure that, you know, people are familiar with the tool. Obviously with training, we've used all the great resources from Eden and YouTube, designed some of our own. But besides that, we've also worked on study replications, taking studies that our kind of traditional programmers have put together in the past and replicated them using Atlas retroactively. But we're also going to start beginning on let's actually independently and to get like proactively actually generate some studies and see how they compare after the fact. So those are some of the techniques that we've had to use to kind of build trust in Atlas. And I think that we're taking some other ideas from Odyssey, as I tend to do, thinking about starting our own symposium internally for Atlas kinds of work that people have done, just to continue to showcase, here's what's possible. And we've also started an ambassador group because it's impossible for me to be everywhere, although I try. So we've actually put together an ambassador group, meaning people who are super users of Atlas that can go and coordinate and collaborate with our various TAs across the organization. So those are some of the techniques we've tried, and I'm going to be mindful of time, so I will pass it back to Paul.
Those are some great ideas. I had one quick question that we're going to run through everyone, and that is, what is the one main thing that you think is limiting the adoption of Odyssey in your type of organization? What is the thing that, and so I'll say for healthcare, one of the things that I see is if I can get Odyssey to create quality measures, I think every health system would adopt Odyssey because it's such an operational value and there's so much cost that we put into analytics for measuring quality measures. So I do think between clinical registries and quality measures, I think that would have a huge a huge windfall in adoption within the healthcare system. Keran, do you want to talk about Regeneron, what you think would unlock more users?
Yeah, one is to better understand the data standardization in the use of regulatory decision making. On the sort of individual level, I feel like many of my teammates, we are more, we like to be closer to the source of the data. We're so to speak the data originalists. So obviously, sort of the OMOP data model can be a little bit daunting because it's been transformed. We can, we're currently trying to overcome that by, doing some comparison analysis using estimate generated from OMOP converted model, OMOP converted data versus sort of native data, and so to speak, to get people more comfortable with this new sort of paradigm shift.
All right.
Thanks.
Ajit, any last comments?
I'll just say what I was saying in the chat. Actually, the vocab trust and understanding is still something that's hard for us to scale. So we've had to, run through some existing code lists that we've had and actually demonstrate that codes that may not be in the OMOP vocabulary or mapped are actually insignificant. But, we don't want to just diminish, the complaints. I think we also have to embrace them and enrich the vocabulary as best we can. So we're making it a priority for the rest of the year on our side to have more feedback loops with the vocab team. I think till date, we've been just a passive kind of consumer. So I think trying to continue to enrich the vocabulary, whether it be coverage of medical codes or mappings or other ideas around how to improve hierarchies in other domains like procedure that may be not as well captured. That's something that we're really passionate about. But I think that's where we still face the biggest challenge.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for being on this panel. Craig, back to you.